Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this special catch-up webinar, which was initially programmed as part of the Byron Writers Festival. I'm Glenn Connley, Senior Media Advisor at the Australia Institute. Today, we're having a conversation about ideas, big, brave ideas, and how to turn them into reality. On the panel for this webinar is author, editor, columnist, and academic Julianne Schultz, author, advocate, unionist, and the man best known for his noble fight for the Indigenous voice to the Australian Parliament, Thomas Mayo, and the man who leads one of the biggest ideas factories in the country, academic, economist, author, and co-CEO of the Australia Institute, Richard Dennis. Welcome to you all.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you.
Today we are coming to you from the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We encourage you to take part in this conversation. You can type your questions in the Q&A panel and you can upvote other people's questions as well. Please keep things civil and on topic, or you might just find yourself removed from the conversation. I'd like to start off posing a big picture question to each of our panellists. Every now and then our Prime Minister steps onto his RAF plane and onto the world stage. It enables us to see him in a different light. We also see Australia's strengths and weaknesses in a different light too. So at the Asia Pacific Forum, he failed to get a couple of deals up as our terrible energy policies came back to bite us. In the US, he recognised Palestine as a state, standing beside other bigger and middle powers like France, Canada and the UK. And then in the UK, he declared himself a great defender of democracy. So is he, and by extension Australia, a global leader in ideas? Does our government and democracy deliver for its people and the world? Are we a land which has big ideas and delivers on those ideas? Let's start with you, Thomas, if you don't mind. A couple of years ago, Australia's Indigenous people had a good idea. You could probably argue it wasn't actually that big an idea or a particularly difficult idea, but it quickly fell victim to the pathetic two-party oppose everything for a few cheap points system we have here. So, Thomas, do you think we're still a land of big, brave ideas?
Well, I don't think there's too many ideas that are new these days, right? You know, after so many thousands of years of human existence, I think we, naturally take other ideas and we try and improve on them, and that's what the Voice to Parliament was about. You know, we take good ideas, we see what works for other First Nations, what has been achieved in other parts of the world, and we try and take those things, and also, like the Australia Institute does, an evidence-based approach, and try and implement things. So I think we still try, but it has been a long time since we've seen the sort of relevant sort of political will and courage to implement things. We're a country of, I guess, bad ideas as well, where how we've seen so many opportunities pass us by. What we've done with our resources has been a complete and a crying shame. Hardly a sovereign wealth fund to speak of compared to the ideas that other countries had and what they've done with it. So there's a lot of contradictions there, but I think there's good ideas that smart and progressive Australian people have, but the challenges sometimes seem insurmountable.
Julianne, I'm really interested in the role of the media here, but maybe we start with the same question to you. Are we still a land where big, brave ideas can succeed?
Look, I'd like to think so. I think that the sort of economic and social structures that have evolved over the last 3 decades in many ways make that slightly more difficult than it once was. But I don't think it's ever been easy to get big ideas up. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, I learned when I was writing The Idea of Australia, that the notion that ideas don't just drop from the sky, that they have to be well considered, they have to be developed, they have to be argued, they have to be persuasive, and often they need a crisis to bring them to reality. But you look back over time and you see that there's a sort of pattern that basically a good idea takes a lifetime, to evolve. And so that sort of 70 years and 10 is basically the arc of a good idea. So, I mean, right back to the sort of formation of Australia as an independent nation, more independent than not nation in 1901, the process of that federation was an idea that was posited in the late 1880s. And Henry Parkes, who accepted the offer of, trying to get it through, thought he could do it in a year. Well, it took 12, it took two referendums in each of the colonies. It took negotiations with the UK before the thing could be approved. WA doesn't join until it's passed the House of Commons. The process of even something like that is protracted. So I think that it's for those of us who are trying to advance better ideas and good ideas, it's recognizing what strategies and tactics that you have to use to try and get that persuasive influence to stick.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And that takes us beautifully to Richard, who has a good theory about how long it takes to achieve change, or if you like, to get up a good idea. Richard, Julianne just talked about 12 years to get the idea of Australia up. You have a working theory of about a decade to achieve decent change, don't you?
Yeah, look, when I started playing this game about 30 years ago, I used to tell myself and other people it took at least 3 years to kind of get an idea into the public consciousness. But I guess I've either increased my ambition or increased my pessimism. But yeah, the things we work on now, like getting a federal corruption watchdog up, or hopefully soon making the gas industry pay some tax. Yeah, these are 10-year fights. And they're 10-year fights to get things done that already exist overseas, that already work at the state level, and that most people actually want. Like, that's how conservative Australia is. Even when it's tried and tested, even when people want it, boy, the power in Australia is the power to stop things happening. Everyone worries about lobbying and donations and stuff. Yeah, we can fix that. But if you really want to understand power in Australia, power is the ability to say no. 90% of people might want to reform gambling advertising, but they're wrong. And I can just play this out. I can just play for time. And it takes a long time and a lot of pressure just to do kind of old ideas. But let me be provocative. Australia's great at doing big, bold ideas. I'm not saying good ones, but big, bold ones. You want $360 billion to build some nuclear submarines? No problem. No problem. Didn't go to Treasury. No costings. Didn't go to Treasury. Didn't go to Cabinet. Did not go to Cabinet. And when Scott Morrison said, let's do the big, bold nuclear subs thing, within 24 hours of going public with that, Labor in opposition, who hadn't been briefed on it because there was no brief because it didn't go to Cabinet, within 24 hours, Labor's like, done, sold at that price, 360 billion, let's do this, people. Right? So just to be crystal clear, we are one of the richest countries in the world. And if we want to chuck $360 billion at a problem, no problem. But you want to spend more on health, you want to, spend more on education, God forbid you want to stop subsidising fossil fuels and spend some more money on climate change. Well, where would the money come from? Where would the money come from? Money doesn't grow on trees, Richard. Money doesn't grow on trees. Come on, we need a good process here. Can everybody just calm down? This is going to take a decade before we get anywhere. So let's own this, right? Some people are whipping their ideas through Parliament in no time. It's not Parliament that's broken. Some people are getting $300 billion for their bad idea. No problem. No one said that was inflationary. No one said that'll, cause a deficit. No, they're the special 300 billions. Don't worry about them. But you want to do something popular with evidence behind it that maybe the government's promised to do in the past. Hey, take a breath there, son. Let's be pragmatic. So, of course we can do big, brave ideas. Of course we can. The question is, will this government today do one federally, or wherever you're watching, will your state government today do something big and bold that you like, as opposed to something big and bold you hate, like privatise a thing you love, knock down a thing you love. There's plenty of big, there's plenty of bold. The problem is when the people watching this think, why can't we have some nice things? Ooh, calm down there, fella.
So let's get straight to questions then. On the playing the long game and why it takes so long, Julianne, to you, Neil suggests that we're actually scared of change and new ideas in Australia. Do you reckon there's a fear of change among the establishment?
amongst the establishment. I mean, I think Richard's absolutely spot on. It's the power to slow down. I mean, and it took me ages to figure it out, why was this so difficult? And I had a few experiences where I was involved in sort of trying to get changes up, quite close into sort of the political process. And one was years ago about digital television, back in the days when digital television was being introduced. And the ABC at that point said, it's not in our interest to do high definition television. We want to be able to do multi-channels so that we can bring a more diverse range of programming to the Australian people. This is 2000. And the TV networks, which was still at that stage largely owned, Kerry Packer was still there. I can't forget who the personal owners of the others were, but there was very much still a family-owned business model. They were completely opposed. They wanted big screen, high definition television. That was it, one channel, so they could maximize their advertising revenue. They did everything you could imagine, lobbying politicians, big presentations in Parliament, everything you could imagine. What happens? The legislation stops the ABC, or sort of in the end allowed ABC and SBS to do multi-channeling, and there was all these carve-outs for the free-to-airs. And eventually, what have they got now? I mean, I lose track of the number of channels that are offered by the free-to-airs. They're endless. Playing in kids' time the shows I watched when I was a child, so bereft of content. So that thing about just stopping things, just saying no until you've figured out how you can make, you being the corporations, how you figure out you can make money from it, is just such a sort of standard pattern. The other thing that I think just is part of that is that, and it's picking up again on what Richard was saying and reflecting back on the whole Indigenous debates that have been going on again for centuries now, a century and a half more. That what tends to happen in Australia is things get introduced, changes get made, people are agitated, upset, they want it to change because in their own lives they're accommodating change all the time. Who would have thought that the range of living styles that we have now would have been imaginable even 40 years ago? In our own personal lives we make that change, but we haven't been able to turn it into that sort of political system. So you think about things like gay marriage, same-sex marriage, it was just politically resisted, blocked. It happens and nobody really ever talks about it again. White Australia policy took 70 years to finally close down. We've never really had a government that's had the courage to sit up and say, we made a mistake and this is what we're doing now. And then we had these lingering discussions because we've never actually closed off on something that should have been closed off on. So 2 points. I mean, one is, yes, the power to say no and stall is extraordinary. And then the inability to deal with the change when it's happened and really bed it down and make people feel very comfortable about it is also a flaw, I think.
Thomas, can I come to you with a question from Anthony? It's a really good question, and it's a really simple question. He says, is there any point anymore trying to argue the basis of evidence? And by extension, I'll say facts, because when you were arguing for the voice to Parliament, there were falsehoods. In fact, there were outright lies being told in public advertising by members of Parliament. So evidence and facts, is there still a place for that kind of argument these days?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, although the science says that people, when we're having a debate and a discussion, trying to help our friends understand the lies that they're hearing, and how ridiculous some of the conspiracy theories are, the evidence and facts just don't are not what move people, right? But it's fundamental to everything that we try and do, So I think there's still a place for it. We need that sort of work done. What we do need to come up with in this country is better ways to get through the masses of information that people are exposed to, all of the noise out there, but also the way that the lies and disinformation are designed to get an emotional reaction from people. That's a great challenge that we have. I think it takes not only our fellow progressive-minded people, and people that understand these things to get out there and take action. The people that are listening to this panel discussion included, but it takes leadership from government, and to go. Sort of takes us back to the beginning of this conversation about political will, and the the way that politicians seem to, in this country, say no to the things that are obviously good for all, and give their ear to the minorities that are actually taking us down a poor that are not serving the national interest. It's about that leadership as well, and it's something that we've suffered from for too long, is a lack of courageous and visionary leadership.
Glenn, can I take a swing at that one?
But the difference between truth and lies, fire away.
Well, look, so I agree with Thomas, absolutely. And let's be clear, of course, facts matter. They do matter. They matter right now. They matter today in every country in the world. Of course they matter. But, we have to be careful not to confuse things. Do you want evidence to be based on evidence? So do you want policy based on evidence? Is policy based on evidence sometimes? You bet. But just because sometimes policy is based on evidence doesn't mean it always is. All right. And we just need to recognize this. Like, you might have a spreadsheet at home that you use to help choose, which super fund to be in or what bank to be in. You might spend hours shopping online to decide whether to buy this television, whatever. Like, everyone's got their foibles. Whatever you do your research into, that's fine. And guess what? Sometimes you do impulse purchasing. Both are true. Both are okay. Both are human. And I think a lot of progressives fall into a big trap by raging against decisions they don't like and saying, but they've ignored the evidence, when we all ignore evidence sometimes. Okay? It's okay. But you've got to own when I'm relying on evidence to make this decision and when I'm going on my feels. All right? And in a democracy, we should expect that most of the big decisions are based on evidence. But just because we expect that doesn't mean that is the case. And I just told you, 360 billion did not go to Treasury. I can't emphasize this enough. When Josh Frydenberg was asked, can we afford it? His answer was, if it's a priority, you can always afford it. Okay? And he's right, because we're one of the richest countries in the world. So all I'd say, so of course facts matter. I want bridges to be designed by people who know how to design bridges, not by people with strong feelings about how bridges should be designed. Well, I'd like all sorts of policy to be designed by people who actually have expertise in that space. But you know what? Sometimes it's not. All right. And we know, like, in the lead up to every state election, there's someone that says, tough on crime, lock them up, throw away the key. Like, no intellectual discipline is more widely ignored than criminology, that says, please don't lock them up and throw away the key. It doesn't work. But we know, right? We're not stupid. We just need to look into reality here. We know that year after year, decade after decade, election after election, country after country, politicians say, but you know what? I feel like we should lock them up and throw away the key. And that's democracy. The evidence isn't mentioned in the Constitution. All right. So us wishing evidence mattered more is okay. But the progressive mistake is to think, oh, I've failed to get gambling reform up, therefore I've failed to collect enough evidence. No. I've failed to stop fossil fuel expansion, therefore I've failed to collect enough evidence. No. There's plenty of evidence, but the decision makers are just choosing to ignore evidence sometimes. And until we just admit that that happens, and that democracy actually allows policymakers to ignore evidence when they feel like it and use evidence when they feel like it, and every 3 years we get the democratic power to say, well, who do I want making those judgment calls about when to use evidence and when to go with their feelings? But as long as progressives just keep going, oh, I haven't won the fight yet, therefore I need another report, you're not actually marshalling the power to put pressure on to drive change. So absolutely evidence matters, sometimes. Right. And when evidence doesn't matter, you have to think, all right, what else can I do? How do I alert people to this decision? How do I highlight that this politician is ignoring all the evidence? All right, that's politics, that's democracy. And evidence doesn't make politics and democracy go away. It makes it better, but ultimately, people have to look into the abyss and realize that the reason we're buying the subs is because we want to. The reason we're subsidizing fossil fuels is we want to. And until we change the minds or the people of the people that want of the people in Parliament doing that, they're going to keep doing it. And as an author of countless reports, I can assure you that we're not one report away from stopping fossil fuel expansion. We might be one election away, but we are not one report away.
So Julianne, let's look at maybe emotion versus evidence, particularly if you look at Trump's America now. Trump is just pure populist talking points versus evidence. Is a faceless but emotional and well-presented talking point argument stronger than an argument based on evidence in 2025?
Well, a couple of things on that. I mean, Trump obviously presents in the way that he presents, which is just unbearable to watch. But anyway, that's his shtick. And so the emotional game is very well crafted, and he is the very good avatar of that thing for a certain sort of American. I mean, God knows there are literally probably more than 100 million Americans who find him repulsive every time he opens his mouth. So it's not like everyone's taken in by it. But one of the things with the Trump thing is that, as Richard says, it's not as though it's pure instinct. I mean, sure, there is a pure instinct thing that he operates, and in my characterization, it's the revenge of the humiliated man. There's a whole lot of these humiliated men around who are seeking their revenge. But there are also extraordinary brains that have been put into this. I mean, you watch the Trump executive orders. Oh, I love my handwriting. It's so beautiful. You watch his executive orders. I mean, he's got teams of some of the best lawyers in America coming up with those things, because otherwise, how would they find these obscure legal precedents on which they're basing them? Like, this is not something that is just a top of the head crazy man stuff. And the same in the sort of economic modeling. I mean, there are people who will dispute, till the cows come home, that the sort of the Hayek's bastards crowd who are in control in America at the moment have got the economic modeling wrong. But there are plenty of people who are prepared to argue that. So I think it's really important to actually both recognize that even somebody who presents in a purely emotional way like Trump is not doing it without an undergirding of robust analysis. We may not agree with that analysis, but it is sitting there, which means that it sticks more than it might. Look, obviously, the sort of emotion fact thing is really, that's sort of central to the whole sort of world in which we live at the moment. I mean, one of the things that I think is really worth thinking about in this country, and I'm really impressed with the work that Julie Mackin has done in her recent book about the schism in the soul of the nation. Australians have not been much inclined to accept a psychoanalytic frame in trying to make sense of why we stick. Richard says, oh, it's one report after another. Thomas has been involved in the sort of, trying to get meaningful recognition for decades. These are not things which have come quickly or, without any preparation work. But why they stick, it's not just as simple as emotion versus fact. I think there is something that sits much deeper, which really needs to be we need to find ways to talk about it, that people don't go, oh God, that's weird, wacky talk, because the pattern of what we resist comes back to deeply held fears and anxieties, which are easily manipulated. But what are those underlying fears? What are those underlying factors which actually cause us to respond in this way? And what they are in Australia is different to what they are in America or in New Zealand or in Britain. They're about a place where people have evolved a way of being and trying to exist and make sense of where they are. So I think that we need to start to think about finding that language that helps us to take the next step beyond the binary of fact and emotion. Sorry, can I just say one other little thing, which is picking up on what Richard was saying. That one of the problems is not just the more facts, but everyone now talks about data. Data this, data that. There's always a number that can be used to justify everything. But the framing of that data is really the crucial first step. And I think that the example that Peter McDonald and the people from ANU showed recently in relation to migration numbers, that more than half of the permanent migration numbers are people who are taking up their rightful right as children or spouses of Australian citizens to become permanent residents and Australian citizens. And they make the point that that group of people are counted in the same pot as the people who are coming here on skilled visas to work. for permanent migration. If you take the people who are here by right, that is, they are the spouse or child of an Australian citizen, and put them in a different category, you find your main, migration, real new arrivals, permanent residents, actually shrinks by more than half. So the emotion that's got stirred up around migration is around a set of numbers which actually don't recognise the reality that a big chunk of those people are here by right. They've got to go through the process, but they're here by right by being the partners and children of Australian citizens. So if you get your categories of data wrong, you've got a fact, but the fact's actually going to lead to an emotional response, which is actually way off key.
Thomas, can I come back to you and talk about the role of hope in ideas and selling ideas? You talk a lot about hope in always was, always will be. What role does hope play, one, in formulating big ideas, but two, in selling them?
Well, we wouldn't be here advocating for things, Julianne, Richard, and myself, if we didn't have hope. I think it's a necessary ingredient for change. For an advocate or an organizer, you just got to believe that that things can be different than they are now, and things can improve. So, it's just that underlying. It's what drives us for everything that we do. So, look, and we didn't lose hope after the referendum because Richard talks about how things take time. Everything that we've achieved has taken time. It's been decades of work. It's been refusing to take no for an answer. It goes to I think the crux of everything that we're talking here about big ideas. None of these ideas that have been for the public good have ever come about without organised struggle. Without people doing the work to get the research done, to disseminate that, to do the work to convince people that they have to take some sort of action and have that mass movement. It's the same in Australia as anywhere in the world. It's the same for First Nations people. It's the same for the working class. So, and with so much that is scary in the world right now, I think one of the reasons why, or one of the ways that we give people hope is to remind them of history. That we have seen fascists rise before, we've seen authoritarians take control. We've seen them try to take control and not quite get there, but we have managed to overcome. People have managed to overcome, and that's one of the things I think people can think about when they're thinking about the big scary United States, and the concern that the way that Australia goes is often soon following in their footsteps. So we've got to do everything that we can do to avoid that, and we've got to organise.
I want to go back to questions. Thanks, Thomas. Julianne, I might throw this one to you. A question from Ellen. Big ideas require imagination. Is there a concern that the introduction of AI will diminish critical thinking and the imagination necessary to come up with big ideas?
Yeah, there are lots of things which are scary about AI. Imagination is innate to the human condition. It's about being able to reflect, consider, and ponder an alternative. And I don't think AI will take that away from us. It might make us lazy, though. It might make us lazy in trying to do it. So I think exercising that muscle of imagination is really, really crucial. It's interesting that when the surveys are done of sort of national values, I was struck a few years ago, there was quite a big international one that was done, and Australians ranked imagination much lower than a lot of other countries as a sort of an attribute that they valued highly in themselves and their children, which I thought was really deeply concerning, because it suggested the sort of an apathy and a complacency and a comfort with living in a rich country where things sort of work most of the time for most of the people. So I think finding ways to reactivate that imagination is really, really crucial. And having the space to disagree and say, oh, yeah, I like this, I don't like that, like just expanding that phrase. So on one level, AI, the thing I guess what worries me about the AI stuff is that it'll make us even lazier in doing that. That's my concern.
Actually, on the subject of laziness, Richard, can I ask you about?
Oh,
No,
thanks,
no.
Glenn. Yeah,
I want to
cheers.
ask you about the laziness of the system, the phrase watering down. We have a political parliamentary system now where it seems just about everything is watered down so that we land in some imaginary sensible centre.
Yeah, look, I think there's democracy is as good as we make it, so let's not sort of just sit back and go, oh, isn't democracy a bit crap these days? People have overcome much bigger struggles in the world, including in Australia in the past, to get democracy into better shape than we've got it in Australia today. So let's not be fatalistic here. But yeah, the way our current kind of politics works is that the hardest issues, the most inconvenient issues, are often sorted out between the major parties behind closed doors. And when I say sorted out, I mean they just agree not to talk about them. Now, Julianne talked about same-sex marriage before. Let's be clear, it existed at a state level, it existed in other countries, the sky hadn't fallen, most Australians supported it, and here's the fun part, most parliamentarians supported it. All right, let's just own this. Most people elected to the House of Representatives supported same-sex marriage. But because Labor had some people in its party that really didn't want it, and the Liberals had some people in their party that really didn't want it, they came to an accommodation, which was, how about both of us just don't do it? And then I never have to have an internal fight with the group that really don't want it in my party, and you don't have to have a fight with the people that you don't want it in your party, and who cares? Right? So again, it's that power to do nothing, that power to make things vanish, even when everyone else is staring at them. That's the problem, I think, with our democracy today, right? So do most Australians want AUKUS? No. Do most Australians want to subsidise fossil fuels? No. Do most Australians think giving half our gas away for free is a good idea? No. But if neither the Prime Minister nor the opposition leader want to have a row about it, then the media won't talk about it, and therefore it can't be important. Right? So I think the big problem with our democracy is that our version of centrism, our version of pragmatism, is that if, basically all political contest takes place between the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, the Prime Minister of the day, the opposition of the day, the sensible centre is between there. Anyone who disagrees with that is by definition extreme, as opposed to just got a better idea or a different idea. So the media treat anything that's not between the major parties as extreme. But of course that means when we have bipartisan consensus, when there's no room between the parties because they both want AUKUS and they both opposed same-sex marriage and they both think giving half the gas away for free is a good idea, then every other opinion is extreme. And if I ring a journo, and you used to be one, Glenn, and we've all met one or two, if I ring a journo and say, I got a good idea, how about we actually tax the gas industry? Their first question is, oh, do you think the government might move on it? And I say, well, no, not today, but, if we all talk about it enough, they might. Oh, right, so you don't think they're going to do anything about it? Oh, it's not a story then, mate. Right? So we've given the two major parties the ability to make problems vanish, not in reality, but in political reality and media reality. And of course, when parliaments don't want to talk about issues that people care about, and the media don't want to talk about issues that people don't care about, is anyone surprised that there's more and more people voting for independents and minor parties and less people reading the mainstream newspapers? All right, so there is a pressure release valve here, but boy, this is why it takes a long time. Because if the Sydney Morning Herald won't talk about it, and the ABC won't talk about it, and the Prime Minister won't talk about it, and the opposition leader won't talk about it, doesn't mean we can't change things, but boy, that takes a long time when so much power is dedicated to doing nothing. And of course, the power is to say that's sensible, that's centrist, and you're all extreme. That's just nonsense, but boy, it's worked for the last couple of decades. But again, major party vote, even at the last election, Labor just won a record majority off a near record low primary vote. So, I've got hope too, Thomas. Hope. I think of hope is fuel, not strategy.
Yeah, that's right.
Hope keeps me going, but it's hard. It's hard work and organising that gets things changed.
Yeah, I'd sort of put it another way there, Glenn. Politicians always take the easiest path. I think that's something that's important to learn. And the other thing about them is that they'll always choose what's in their political interest or personal interest. Especially if it's something that's difficult. I mean, if you understand those two things, then you start to see why I'm talking about the importance of visionary and courageous leadership, because that's what you're up against. All of that self-interest and all of that laziness, I suppose, when you're raising that, to take the easiest path. So we've got to make things uncomfortable for the decision makers, because they never have the courage or vision without thinking that it's going to be in their best interests. That when we look at I thought it was great that Albanese committed to go to a referendum. I thought that was a glimmer of what we need in public leadership. But at the same time, it was a decision taken with the polls indicating that we would succeed, and a whole lot of political work in the background to get it into Labor platform. Change doesn't happen without, getting that leadership.
Yeah. Can I pick up on that? I mean, Thomas, I agree with you, and we've had this conversation in the past, but, the Prime Minister's embracing of the referendum and his engagement with the, Indigenous, the whole Uluru process, and, I think he genuinely felt and believed that, when he made that commitment. But what he failed to do was to make an argument about why this mattered for the whole Australian nation. It wasn't just about accepting the advice of those very nice 3% over there who really have had a bad deal. It was about saying the whole Australian nation depends on sorting out this fundamental thing. And I had a friend who's a European ambassador who'd been in Australia and had gone back to Europe, and partway through that referendum year, I can't remember, sort of July or something like that, I can't remember exactly when, he sent me an email and he said, when do you think your Prime Minister is going to give the nation-defining speech about why this matters to remaking the whole notion of Australia in the 21st century? And I said, well, people are wanting him to, but there's not the courage there to do it. And it's for all the practical reasons that, that Thomas and Richard have talked about. But it does take, taking your rhetoric seriously and putting yourself on the line and then being persuasive. You think back to the sort of, both the good and the bad reforms that happened during the Hawke period. They were constantly in the media. They were constantly on talkback radio. They were constantly in the press gallery saying, this is why we need this to happen. The power of persuasion doesn't happen, that. You've got to be doing it all the time. And
that's right.
To my mind, the failure to come to terms with the settlement issue and the situation of the First Peoples of this land is, it's such a existential flaw in this nation. And, it's sort of like, once we can do that, God help us, once we can do that, a whole lot of other things, I have no doubt, will seem, actually, we can do really hard stuff. Actually, we hadn't thought we could even do this. So that's why I just keep coming back to that process that happened around that referendum and the years and years of work that led up to it. And I admire the Prime Minister for saying it, and I know that he feels it personally, but the failure to actually turn that into something that was truly nation defining, I think is tragic. I'm hopeful that it's tragic.
It goes to that easiest path thing again, right? Yeah. As soon as the floodgates were open with the disinformation, when the coalition made it about themselves, and it came on thick and fast, and there was all the tactics of intimidation, and members of parliament started to think that they'd lose votes over it. Those that had been in passionate support disappeared. That's what happened throughout that time. So again, it goes to that, we need that public pressure, but we also need a politician to have the bravery to pursue their convictions with everything they got. And hopefully, I think Albanese's got the mandate, but there's a whole lot of things that he can do if he finds that courage and has a go.
Thomas, you used the word mandate. We've got a question from Vince to Richard about mandates. This government now has an opposition that's barely relevant in the House of Representatives. They have the Greens that they could they could partner with in the Senate to get anything passed, and arguably a mandate for big, brave ideas. Mandates are typically something politicians can hide behind, saying, I didn't get that at the election, I don't have a mandate for this or that. But now this government does have a mandate for big ideas, does it not?
I think it does. And look, a couple of things there. The word mandate's not mentioned in the Constitution, and I'm not a lawyer, but I take the Constitution quite seriously. The government of the day can do whatever they've got a majority of both houses supporting, and that's constitutional, right? That's how our democracy works. And, you know, Bob Hawke floated the dollar without taking it to the election. Right, without economic modelling. John Howard banned automatic weapons. He didn't have a mandate for doing it. He saw a crisis. He wanted to do something about it. So, you know, let's just be clear. Mandate is just a word a government uses when they want to do something or uses when they don't want to do something. And that's what I think we have to see through, that those of us who want change need to not fall for a whole bunch of excuses for why now is not the time, or I don't have a mandate, or I can't get the numbers in the Senate. Well, do your job, mate. Do your job, right? You know, we're talking about Whitlam 50 years ago because he did his job. He got shit done. And of course, you know, Julia Gillard got a lot done in a minority government. And I think that's one of the reasons that we kind of ignore the Gillard era, because some people find it uncomfortable to admit that she actually got a lot done by talking to the rest of the parliament, getting a majority and getting stuff through. She got a carbon price through. She got the NDIS through. We had a royal commission into sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, which was never going to happen before. So yeah, mandates are used as an excuse to not do good ideas. Mandates are the opposite of evidence-based policy. Imagine the CEO of a company who got appointed on a 5-year term and halfway through his company or her company's in trouble, and everyone's like, what are you doing about it? And he said, oh, waiting till my next contract negotiation because I didn't promise to fix that problem. You know, I'm just here with my checklist. So, yeah, look, the idea of mandate is just used to control other people. But, you know, in their last term, Labor did a bunch of things they didn't have a mandate for. They didn't have a mandate for changing the stage 3 tax cuts. And to be clear, the Australia Institute, having spent 2 years saying, please change them, this is terrible policy, when they changed, when they went and did the right thing, of course, you know, like nearly every Australian, we gave them a big round of applause and said, good on you. When the facts changed, you changed your mind. So, yeah, mandate is just a made-up excuse. And because this was supposed to be at a writers' festival, I've just written my little book, and it's only little, won't take you long to read, called Dead Centre, which is all about this, how we're using so-called centrism, so-called mandates, the need for bipartisan support. No, the Constitution says you need to get it through both houses of Parliament. It doesn't matter if it passes by one vote or unanimously, it becomes law. You know, and John Howard didn't wait for bipartisan support to do work choices. Gough Whitlam didn't wait for bipartisan support to create Medicare and all the other big things he did, Medibank, I should say. Right. So when a government says, I need a mandate at an election or I need bipartisan support, you've just been fobbed off. Right. That's all that's happened. You've been fobbed off. What the minister or the prime minister has said, look, rather than argue with you, I'm just going to pretend I agree with you and then do nothing about it. So, you know, it's every 3 years we get to evaluate people on the basis of the sum of all the decisions they make. And if they make good decisions, we should vote them back in. If you think they made bad decisions, you should vote them out. But we don't go to elections with a list of things you have a mandate for and ticks and crosses next to them. That's not democracy.
Well, yeah, in the UK, you know, they have the mandate. That's their way of framing their policy stuff, you know. So it's like it's yet another of these things that we import sort of half the idea from another country where it's got a different application than it does here, which is problematic. I mean, one of the things though is that you've got to actually then find ways of getting into the heads not only of those people who are standing for elected office, but also for the policymakers that surround them. And one of the things that worries me at the moment, and the area that's currently I'm spending a lot of time thinking and trying to work out, is around the whole aged care policy. I mean, the aged care policy is one which is based, it's beautiful language in the new Act. It's all about human rights, the human rights of the aged to have appropriate care. You've then got on top of it a home care package system which is rationed, and you've got a private residential care system which is extortionate. I mean, absolutely extortionate in its pricing. Like the base entry place for a residential care room in Sydney, starting point about $800 to $1 million. That's the deposit. That's not on top of the charges. You're talking about a fee. You're talking about now, and this is why I talk about the policymakers and advisors. You've now got 2 generations of policymakers in Canberra who've basically come through a market-driven model of how they make their assessments. That's this sort of thinking. They immediately go, in the aged care example, the minister talks about making aged care an investable industry. We are talking about something. We are talking about care which people need at the final stages of their life, and he's talking about making it investable. I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me. So one of the things that I'm really concerned about, and it's why things like the Australia Institute and the work that Thomas and others are doing is so important, that trying to get into the heads of the elected people standing for election and being elected, different ideas, bigger ideas, different ways of framing things, but then the mechanism that means that the policy advisors who are going to say, oh, Minister, sorry, we can't do that because of blah, have actually also got a more expansive toolkit that they can draw on to try and make sense of what the actual needs are.
Julianne, can I stay with you and ask you to expand a little on what you mentioned about the role of the media before? The media is changing. People aren't reading newspapers. Very few people watch free-to-air news bulletins at night, which is where you used to have to go, the Sydney Morning Herald Age, the Herald Sun, Daily Telegraph, Channel 9 or Channel 7 News. That was it. It was easy. Is the changing nature of the media making it harder or easier when it comes to getting up and selling big ideas?
Look, I think it's obviously a part of it. And look, the media, let's be frank. I mean, for most of its time in its Australian history, the media has been a force of conservative, holding things back. That's the nature of it. There was a brief flowering for about, 15, 20 years where journalists were asserting their professionalism and media companies were prepared to let that go, and the boundaries got stretched. So that's part of it. I think the other thing is though that it's really it's a feeling of overwhelm. I mean, I don't know how you feel, but like you open your apps, you look at your stuff every morning. Like there's another 100 articles, that have been published overnight. There's another story of doom. There's more hideous photos coming out of Gaza and Ukraine. Like the feeling of overwhelm is such that you can't actually find what to hang on to that gives you a sense. Actually, I could make this an issue that I can actually pursue. And I think that in a way more than the collapse of the sort of structures that have obviously imploded is really how it affects people. So you pick and choose. I mean, even on your ABC News app, what subjects do you want to hear about? In the past there were certain things you would have been told about even if you didn't choose that you wanted to hear about them. So I think that baseline is gone and the overwhelm is just profound. And for politicians and others in those sorts of roles, they know that it's a wave. This will be gone. Something else will come tomorrow. You don't actually have to sit around and and put it into perspective. And so I think that's sort of part of it. Yeah.
So Thomas, for you, how do you then get through, particularly to young Australians who will tell you they get most of their news off short videos or through influencers?
I think what's important there is that we need to do a lot more to ensure that a good education is accessible. I think we need to address the inequity between funding for private schools and public schools, and I say that because I think the answer to your question is to empower young people to communicate with other young people in the ways that they know are effective. So we've got to ensure that the next generation, younger Australians, have a good education, have good critical analysis, are able to think critically, have access to and understand, sort of the, what do you call it, the literacy of understanding what information is true or false, or how it's designed to, all of that stuff, and then give them the opportunity to communicate. Because I think, even myself, we're to young people know how to communicate with young people. So I think that's the way to do it.
Richard, can I come to you on education? We've had a couple of questions about the role of our education system in the world of big ideas. How do we teach critical thinking then, which is probably now more than ever important given the amount of misinformation that's out there?
Oh, look, I mean, it's one of those, the old joke, how do you get from here to there? Oh, I wouldn't start from here. I mean, we've spent 30 years breaking our education system, okay? We've used kind of neoliberal theory, kind of market-based incentives to really radically change our universities, radically change our high schools, and increasingly our primary schools. So, to give you an example, basically no one goes to a private school in Northern Europe, and more Australians go to private schools than Americans do. And our universities, ANU, we've just put out, the Australian Institute's put out a paper today saying that according to the Auditor General, the ANU made a surplus of $90 million. According to Julie Bishop, the Chancellor, they made a loss of $140 million. So according to the ANU leadership, they have to scrap the music school and sack a bunch of staff because there's a financial crisis, which their own audited accounts say doesn't exist. So, unfortunately, we've broken the structures that would be able to protect us from this new threat of mis and disinformation. Now, I'm not saying, therefore, we shouldn't try and turn the ship around, but I'm saying that it's us that made bad decisions to rely on the private sector in childcare, the private sector in school education and marketisation in our universities. And now we're all like, oh, shit, we're under a new threat. If only we had a well-functioning education system. Oh, whoops, we got rid of that. But just, if we want to take a leaf out of the Northern European books, which I strongly encourage, in Norway, they tax their fossil fuel industry and give their kids free higher education. In Australia, we subsidise the gas industry and we charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. The Commonwealth government gets more revenue from HECS repayments than it gets from its so-called petroleum resource rent tax. So again, we're one of the richest countries in the world. If we wanted to fix this, that's a big if, but if we wanted to fix this, what we'd have to do is invest heavily in education as a good, not education as a skill that will get you a specific job. That's not what education's for. I'm a former academic. I love teaching, right? None of the jobs I've done were jobs that I thought of when I was at high school or were trained for when I was at uni. I did an economics degree. It didn't help me do most of what I did, but it taught me to think. So, yeah, unfortunately, if we're going to unscramble this omelette, we have to admit we've made a real mess of it. And it would be unfair to now say to existing teachers, hey, how about fixing disinformation to your curriculum? No, that's not going to work. We need root and branch change. Other countries are better at it than us. We could spend more money or different money on it if we wanted to, but the worst thing we could do is just chuck something else on a busy teacher's to-do list. And I suspect that's what we'll do.
Well, we are coming towards the end of this webinar at the risk of turning it into an episode of Insiders. Let's get some final thoughts and observations on the idea of big ideas. Perhaps I could come to you first, Julianne.
Okay, can I do a little shameless self-promotion? I mean,
indeed,
a book, a writer's festival, on SBS TV, starting on the 15th of October, a new TV series starts made by Blackfella Films called The Idea of Australia. And both Thomas and Richard have starring parts in it. And it really tries to explore how we might reconfigure, what the future idea of this country is by drawing on the history and past experience in a really entertaining way. It's not finger pointing TV. It's quite good fun. So put a note in your diary for the 15th of October.
Fantastic. Thomas, one of the things I might ask you to address as you give your final observation is the idea of bouncing back, which you look at very heavily, of course, in your book, after, in this case, the system, a referendum failing, to give us something, but perhaps positive, to take away on the big idea after rejection, perhaps.
No, look, like the idea that I want to share is, with all of the fear mongering going on and all the genuine fears about what's going on in the world, the genocide in Palestine, the rise of the right in countries like the United States that we're so strongly linked to, the obvious is to not lose hope, but the less obvious is to not lose faith in each other and think that everybody is our enemy. And that's what this disinformation is largely designed to do, is to cause us to lose faith or trust, or to think that we're all after each other's backyards or after each other's, we're all some evil thing because of our differences. I think this is the most important message, and a way to resist or to not go down the path that the United States has. And it even goes to the point, and without being naive, we shouldn't be naive. But, when you're standing around a barbie and people, someone says, all of the politicians are corrupt. Well, I think as soon as we start believing that and even lose faith in our own democracy, that's a slippery slope as well. Not that we shouldn't be challenging, corruption or what seems obvious, what is obvious, where the effect of these billionaires and, the gas lobby and all that are getting the ear of the politicians more. But we've got to believe in ourselves. We've got to keep talking with each other, and we've got to continue to engage in our democracy. And if that means joining a political party, for example, is big and unwieldy, difficult to grab the steering wheel of those big machines that's what we need to do. That's my message.
Thanks, Thomas. Richard, your final observation. Are we still able to get good, big, evidence-based ideas through a system sort of shrouded in misinformation and critics?
Absolutely. And again, the Gillard government did it very successfully. So I agree with Thomas. You got to lean in. You got to get involved. Democracy will never yield everything you want. Right? There's 25 million people in Australia. The one thing I promise is you won't get everything you want. But I tell you what, the people who want to get involved will get more of it than the people who sit back and wish the evidence would do the work or someone else would do the work. So yeah, step one, I couldn't agree more about the need to be involved. And as Thomas said, like, really, what do people with enormous corporate power and other forms of power in Australia want? They want people watching this to feel like they can't make a difference. They want you to give up. They want you to think it's all broken. They're betting on your cynicism. They're thriving on cynicism. Because if we all believe it's all broken, then actually they just win cheap. The other thing I'd say, I really think Julianne made this point at the beginning, and it is so important. She talked about the kind of cultural and psychological barriers that we've got. I think Australia is a post-colonial country that's never come to terms with how we got to where we are, and it means that we're stuck in so many problems that we need to shake off. We need some national therapy, and part of that, unfortunately, went backwards with the rejection of the voice to Parliament. But we need to have these conversations because the mining industry, the resources industry, just thrive on the idea that we need the resources sector to put things on boats to send it back to Mother England, or they'll forget about us. Where will we be without our exports? Said no grown-up country kind of ever. Like 180 or so countries don't have a mining industry. How do they even exist? Said no one ever. Well, yeah, but ours is actually more complicated. We just obsess about the mining industry. It employs 3% of us. So yeah, we need to come to terms with that past, and because we can't or won't or haven't, I think that's why so many issues remain unresolved. like our relationship with Indigenous Australia, and indeed why people get so confused about what's happening in Gaza. I mean, it's a genocide. It's horrible. There you go. It's simple. So, but because we want to check that the Americans are okay with our opinions, we haven't got that strong sense of our leaders, not our public. Our leaders don't have this strong sense of national identity. And in turn, that gets in the way of them being able to represent us well. I don't think Australians are the problem. I think Australian political culture is the problem.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Julianne, and thanks, Thomas, and thanks to all those who tuned in, shared their comments and questions. This webinar will be available on the Australia Institute website. That's australiainstitute.org.au, and our YouTube page shortly. Also, while you're there, check out our other podcasts, Follow the Money, Dollars and Cents, and After America. As I mentioned, this has been recorded. Thanks, everyone, for taking part. It's been a great hour. It's been a privilege to be part of this conversation. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.